The impact of incarceration on political representation. Dr. Remster and I are both associate professors now at Villanova in the sociology and criminology department. We started this project, just to let you know how academic processes go, we started this project in 2013. It was first published in 2018 after a year of us doing the work, and then 3 years of drafting, and then 1 year of just waiting for an approved thing to actually come out in print. And so we're really excited that our now could be an elementary school baby is publicly available and hopefully can help influence decisions about how to do redistricting in 2020. So I'll dive in. If you have any questions for clarification, please ask them. I don't want you confused. I don't want you sitting there staring at me like my intro to sociology students who then ask me questions on email the next day instead of in person, though I like those questions as well. So to get us started, prison gerrymandering, a concept that we'll describe in a little bit more depth in a minute or two, is a form of gerrymandering that is new. Because incarceration rates have never been anything like they are, starting in the 90s, growing into the 2000s, peaking in the teens. And that is a map of incarceration. And one of the things we often make the mistake of is looking at federal incarceration and thinking at a national level. Much like redistricting and gerrymandering in general, this is a state-level problem, state and local problem. It is state prisons and local jails that are driving the increase in incarceration. It is state prisons and local jails that we need to think most aggressively about in terms of redistricting. While the good news is we have seen a small decrease in incarceration rates, 2020 incarceration looks like it won't be all that different from 2010. So if we don't change our redistricting practices from 2010, we should see the same results in terms of the relationship between incarceration and redistricting. And I just realized that didn't have, oh no, it does have notes. Good. Ooh, I can see my notes. You won't hear me just go on random tangents. You don't want that. You want that. All right. So here's the broad overview. I usually walk, but there's a mic. Okay. I can. You don't even want that. That just. Yeah. 1, 2. All right. No, see, too close. It's too close. All right. Yeah, that's not going to work. It's a good idea. All right. In short, when we think about the relationship between incarceration and democracy, we think about one of two problems. And it is admittedly the bigger problem, which is that across almost every single state, excluding Vermont and Maine, if you are incarcerated and convicted with a felony, you cannot vote. And so you are a citizen of the United States, but your right to vote has been taken away from you. That's a problem. That's a moral decision we can make about whether or not that is something that we believe should be the cost of a criminal infraction. And then there's the additional problem of being disenfranchised after serving your sentence. But that's not what we're looking at, so we can leave that for Q&A if you want. The other main pillar of our democracy is the idea of equal representation. Codified in the 1960s as one person, one vote. And importantly, it was not one voter, one vote, it was one person, one vote, because it recognized that representation is not about your ability to directly access the right to choose your representative, but about the fact that you have a representative you can contact. And we're going to circle back to that as to why I think this is a particularly problematic form of gerrymandering, in prison gerrymandering, right? So how does prison gerrymandering work? Having said it, I don't have to describe gerrymandering to you. If I do, I ask you what you have done with your mornings. So instead, we'll move right into it, right? In terms of how we how we start redistricting, legislative districting relies on census data. We know that. Census has a problem with some types of residents who might move frequently or might have been moved for reasons other than their own decision. How do we count, for example, members of the military? Where should college students who are living in a residential dorm count themselves or be counted by the census? And so the census, all the way back in the first census came up with the usual residence rule, which is nice and simple in some ways. Wherever you usually lay your head down at night when the census is being collected is where you should be counted. And so colleges actively promote getting counted as living at the college. Right? Every single college has someone try to make sure students say that they're living in the college. The other main example of a mobile population is military members, especially military overseas. And going back to that idea of representation is about having access to someone in the government who you can say, you represent me. Even if I don't vote, you represent me. Military members are allowed to register at home even when they are living abroad as part of the census. Incarcerated individuals are people who have not chosen where to live, like the military, but cannot vote, unlike most of the military, and are moved by the state, like the military. So one of the arguments legally that has been made is that the most similar comparison to incarcerated individuals is a military experience, and they are allowed to register at what they deem their usual residence, not what the state deems to be their usual residence. In cases of prisons, one of the interesting components of the post-industrial American economy, now I'm getting back into intro to sociology class, is where we located prisons. We didn't locate prisons to be near where people who are incarcerated were living. We located them where we wanted an economic jolt to a local economy, which in the 80s and 90s, when we were building a lot of those prisons at the height of the mass incarceration boom, was rural America. And so many prisons are located in what was, and often still is, but sometimes is no longer, rural parts of the country. Predominantly white parts of the country, where our incarceration is predominantly of people of color, disproportionately from urban areas. That's easy to say, and it's easy to understand in the abstract, but it's a lot easier to see visually. So what we're going to show next is an example of a number of districts in Pennsylvania where prisons and where jails and also where ICE detention centers are, because they also count as residents, and where local populations are. So these are Census Dot Maps. The University of Virginia demographers came up with them. They're a lot of fun to just look around at different parts of the country and see how segregated we are in general. And by fun, I mean disappointing. Every dot is one individual person. Guess where SCI Graterford, which is now SCI Phoenix just down the road, is? You can all see it. We also have the county jail near the bottom where it says Eagleville. Oh, this doesn't have a laser pointer, so that doesn't help. There. You can see both the large numbers of people, but also how different they are from the racial demographics of the area near them. So that's SCI Graterford, now Phoenix. This is District 150. This is one of the districts that we argue is constitutionally invalid in Pennsylvania. This is District 88. I think you can all guess where Camp Hill is in that district.
Rory,
yes?
if you use the top button on the clicker, it's a spotlight.
Oh.
Keep pushing. There you go.
Oh, that's even fancier than a laser pointer. There's Camp Hill. Look at that. All right, cool. It's near Harrisburg, so we're quite close to Camp Hill. We're just about right there, actually, right now. But even near a city, you can see the difference between that prison and the local neighborhood. So if you wanted to use that in redistricting to create a disproportionate racial demographic or a disproportionate total number, that wouldn't be very hard to accomplish. For example, that was the wrong one. That was the wrong one. That is Philadelphia's main jail, across State Road from a diversifying neighborhood in Philadelphia, but part of a district that is mostly up here. Basically kind of cuts State Road Hill out. Again, District 173 is one of the districts that we'll note is constitutionally too small if we were to remove incarcerated people from its population. Here's the York Jail, and you can see York Jail, and now ICE Detention Center as well. So that's actually now going to be more Hispanic than it looks in 2010. And then finally, for one that is truly rural, actually, I should note in this case, while this doesn't end up being constitutionally too small or too large a district, the city of York, I'm having way too much fun with this spotlight. The city of York down here is in a different district, District 95, represented by a black Democrat named Carol Hill Evans, while District 47, which includes the jail and the ICE detention center, is represented by a Republican long-term member of the House, Keith Gillespie. And finally, SCI Mercer, just so we can see a truly rural example of this. SCI Forest is one where you just can't see anything but the green dots of black prisoners. So overall, having shown you some specific prisons, in fact, District 8, all of the black residents of District 8 that we could identify are incarcerated. And there are other districts that look like they have sizable non-white populations of 8 or 10 or 20% even, but that's driven almost entirely by incarceration. And legislators, having been given surveys, I forget the names of the political scientists who did this research, legislators who are surveyed about who are who do you represent, do not include incarcerated individuals. Legislators whose home districts have high rates of incarceration and high rates of people being sent elsewhere consider the people who are incarcerated members of their district because their families go to them. Those incarcerated people go to them to ask for services from government about criminal justice issues or about their kids and their kids' schools and things like that. So, and I think, Sarah, for now you're going to see prettier slides than the ones when you see slides I made, or prettier maps, I should say, because I do not have a visual mind at all. This is kind of an overview of Pennsylvania. First, you see the state prison population by where they are incarcerated. The only one that is close to a major metro area was at District 150, which is in the bottom right corner. And then where they are coming from. And you can see it is primarily and overwhelmingly disproportionately from Pittsburgh and from Philadelphia. And here's where you realize that Dr. Remster wrote these slides and I talked because I mentioned this already. Damn it.
About the military,
Yes.
Can you say that the military and prison populations are similar in not being able to vote?
No, so military can vote, right? Some members of the military, though, are members of the military because that is one of the routes to citizenship. So that I don't want to not acknowledge them. But the overwhelming majority of the military are legal voters. Yeah.
So I'm curious because, you mentioned that we need to look at county jails and, of course, state prisons.
Yes.
But in Pennsylvania, if you're incarcerated in a county jail, you can vote.
If you are incarcerated in a county jail and not yet convicted of a felony,
Yes.
you can vote. However, you are considered a resident of the county jail at the census, but you are legally not allowed to register as a voter and deem the county jail your location of residence. So you're counted in one location and you're voting somewhere else. And in many cases, the county jail is part of a dramatic change in the populations of two districts. Does that make sense? Yeah, I went too much. If you are in jail but not convicted of a felony yet, you're an eligible voter. And so you could register to vote or be registered to vote. However, a law in the book specifically says you cannot register to vote as living at the jail. So if you live in District A and your jail is in District B, you are legally required to vote in District A if you want to vote. And that's if you can get around to voting, which is very difficult if you are currently incarcerated. You vote absentee, and if the prison, how easy or hard that is in a county jail depends on a lot of individuals making it easier or hard. Bob?
Same is true of halfway houses.
Half-
You can't use those addresses as,
Yeah.
for registration, voter registration.
Yes, and another thing to note, especially about state prisons and this problem, is when you are released on parole, you're required to go back to your committing county. So again, you are required to leave the area that you resided in according to the census as you leave.
Also, I wanted to add that it sounded like another point of conflict is wherever you are incarcerated, you go to your legislator in that from where you're from to help advocate for you. However, they don't really see you as that because they can't do anything for you because you are counted in the county that, or you're counted where you are incarcerated. So that creates another a huge conflict. Is that correct?
It does. In fact, in talking to legislators who have large parts of their residents who are incarcerated elsewhere, they're overburdened with constituent requests for services because they get all of their constituents, the 60,000 of theirs, plus 1,000 or 2 or 3 that are incarcerated. And incarcerated individuals, because they are trying to figure out how to help their families back home, often have more than typical amounts of constituent service needs and requests. And so you are getting worse service as the incarcerated individual, but also the community that you are from is getting overburdened and unequally represented. And that's kind of the key here. Which segues to, if we simply took out state and federal incarcerated individuals, just said, let's pretend that they're not here. The constitutional rule is you have to be plus or minus 5% in terms of the total size of your district compared to the average. These are 2 state Senate districts that would be deemed too small. So they are at least 5% lower than the average size of a district. If we were to remove state and federal incarcerated individuals. And there are 7 House districts that are too small if we were to take state and federal incarcerated individuals out of the numbers. And one of the interesting things, because often people think this is a partisan issue because we're talking about a disproportionately non-white population, which on average votes for Democrats more than Republicans, moving into disproportionately rural and white areas, which traditionally vote Republican, is that this is not as simple as benefiting one party or the other. And when we get into other versions of this, we again see an even split between representatives who are Democratic or Republican. But what if we didn't just take them out because they deserve representation as well? We actually put them back where they were from. And that's what Dr. Remster and I did. And so I want to go through that a little quickly, right? Overall, though this is not necessarily interesting to us in this room because we're interested in Pennsylvania's redistricting, but overall, Pennsylvania is a really good test case for this because the incarceration rate is about average for the country. Racially, we're almost exactly at the national numbers for that. In terms of what % of the population is urban or suburban and rural, we look like the country in those ways. Pennsylvania is split into 203 state House legislative districts, roughly 60,000 people per district, which again, 60,000 people per district is about the national average. So 203 is pretty large for a state house, 60,000 is pretty typical. And then the requirement is, as I mentioned, you must be within 5% of that roughly 60,000 in order to be deemed constitutionally legal. Otherwise, you violate one person, one vote. Because if one district is larger than another district, that vote is significantly weaker than other districts. So if we took everyone out of their state, if we took all the federal prisoners and took them out, because we don't know if they came from Pennsylvania, and we did not get that access from federal numbers, then we'd need to find the ones who are living in other states. Take away federal prisoners. Take state prisoners who we know what county they're from and their race, their racial identity. And then we use educational estimates also to kind of to estimate the effect of class, social class on this as well. And we take all the people living in county jails as well as halfway houses and allowed them to go back to home communities. What would we see? So 34 of the 203 districts would gain or lose more than one standard deviation, which for us is 837 residents, almost 1,000 residents in 34 districts, some of which significantly more than 1,000. As I show in the next couple of slides, there are significant geographic differences in where they are leaving and where they're going to. 4 districts would be legally too small. I think I have the names of those. Would be legally too small. Those include District 150, which is the one with SEI Graterford, SEI Phoenix. It loses over 5,000 residents in 2010. In 2020, SEI Phoenix, I think, actually has more beds than Graterford, so it'll turn out to lose, well, at least, if not more, than 5,000 residents if this does not change. So whatever has Graterford / Phoenix in it is almost definitively going to be constitutionally too small if we did not count them. District 19 contains Pittsburgh's largest jail. District 63 contains SEI Forest. And District 88, which was the one with SEI Camp Hill, which is the largest intake facility for incarcerated men in Pennsylvania. So that's where you go before you go somewhere else. It's not even where you end up staying. 3 of those 4 districts are outside of urban areas. Only 19 is in an urban area, and actually Pittsburgh's jail has moved, so District 19 will have to change its borders anyway. The 4 districts that are legally too large, if we were to bring people back to their home communities, you can probably guess this. 3 of the 4 are in Philadelphia, 197, 179, and 203. 71 is not in Philadelphia, it's actually in Johnstown. It's the district that contains Johnstown is close to too big, and so that little push from the county jail as well as incarceration in state prisoners led to it. Those 4 districts that are constitutionally too large, that violate one person, one vote, represent 264,000 Pennsylvanians. Over 100,000 black Philadelphians are underrepresented. That's 1/5 of Philadelphia's black population. So there's the racial effect of this. And this is also a conservative estimate. We did not know their exact addresses. We know incarceration is very locally defined. It's not just from the city, it's from a particular neighborhood that is hyper-incarcerated. But we had the county, and we had the education level, and we had the race of individuals, so we could give best guesses. But in all likelihood, it's even more dramatic than what we're showing. Pennsylvania Departments of Corrections is one of the leaders in corrections in terms of having data and well-organized data, so this is something that they could handle and fix pretty easily. That was the spotlight, not that I'm screwing up the mirror. Okay, all right, I'll use why is it not? I know what's going on. There we go. So this is the overall legislative district population change. The grayed ones are where we see at least 837 residents who are only in that district because they are incarcerated there. The black ones are the districts where people have been taken from those districts and moved into incarcerated areas. What you'll notice for this map compared to the state and federal one are areas like here, which is where you're seeing a county jail that is outside of an urban area and then urban areas next to it. A lot is going on in the highly populated Southeast, so we wanted to zoom in on that. This is the story of Philadelphia. Right about there is where you see SEI Phoenix, and there's the county jail, and there is the main urban part of Montgomery County. Here are the 3 Philadelphia districts, and there's District 150 that I just told you about and is quite an interesting little gerrymander. Look at that little tail. So overall, not only are those particular districts underrepresented, but as we talked about a little bit earlier in response to a great question, the point that some representatives are disproportionately burdened with constituent service requests as a part of this problem, that is also racialized as well. So if we looked at the average experience, the average white person lives in a district that has more incarcerated individuals in it than incarcerated individuals being taken out of it. So this is artificially inflating the power of the average white vote in Pennsylvania. This is artificially inflating the power of the average white vote.
You said that more white people
The average white person in Pennsylvania lives in a district in which there are more people incarcerated in the district than we would return to the district if we were to take all the incarcerated people and count them in their home districts. There isn't like a kind of easy way to say that. It's wordy. I know, super wordy, but that's what's happening. When you compare that, that's about 50. Compare that to the average experience of black individuals, 350. So that means 350 more residents of a district that a black person lives in are being incarcerated in another district. And similarly for Latino or Latina individuals, it's a little bit over 300. So that's the reality of prison districting in Pennsylvania. This is not atypical. There was another slide that I thought I had, and I realized I don't have it. This is not atypical for other states, though I don't have the numbers for them. But it is also something that other states have fixed either by giving incarcerated individuals the right to vote, at which point they are somebody's constituent and those people know it because those are voters, or counting them at their previously known addresses. And so with that as kind of what we could do, I want to thank you for having me. If you would like to read the 30-plus page version of this, you can do that as well. I have my card if you would like that to talk further. And now turn it over to Sarah to talk about what Fair Districts PA is thinking of doing. Thank you so much.
Might have to show me how to use this thing. Well, maybe I don't need to use that. So I just wanted to add another critical element to what Rory shared was not only does it affect representation, it affects resources that are allocated to that community. And we know what resources are, it's money. So whenever you take individuals away from their community and transplant them to some other community, that community that you're counting them in gets the funding, and the community that you took them away from loses the funding. So something we hear a lot is, well, we know that our school districts are terribly underfunded, and it's an equity issue across the state, but particularly in Philadelphia, our public schools are crumbling, they're falling apart. There's lead issues, there's asbestos issues. They don't have clean drinking water in some cases. So taking individuals away from our community, and I'm going to say our because I'm from Philadelphia, this is my community, my hometown. Taking the resources away from that community, if taking individuals away from that community results in taking resources away from that community and setting aside the harm you're doing to the community, because that's not even what this is about per se, but you're also taking away the resources and the funding for the schools. So that kind of breeds poverty, it breeds incarceration, and the process continues. So that's another really critical point of counting, of the importance of counting incarcerated individuals in their home communities. So I'm talking about today about what Fair Districts is going to do about it. So Rory had brought up earlier that there's existing PA law that incarcerated individuals shall not be deemed residents of the election district where the institution is located, but rather where the individual previously resided or their last registration address. So this is what, when Rory talked about they're not allowed to register at the jail or where the prison is, they have to register at home. So that kind of conflicts with counting them in that area. That doesn't make any sense. If I'm not allowed to register in that area, I'm not allowed to vote in that area. And let's set aside felony disenfranchisement laws for a second. I'm not allowed to vote in that area. I'm voting for someone over here, but you're counting me over here. It doesn't make any sense. So basically, the idea is that it's existing PA law. We need to enforce existing PA law and count individuals at their pre-incarceration address. And so, in doing so, Rory mentioned also that there are some states that have changed their laws, that they are, in fact, going, and I think New York maybe and Maine, am I making?
New York, Maryland
New York, Maryland,
Washington just decided.
Washington,
to-
and I think there's 2 more. Yeah, so their law is in place for the next redistricting cycle that prisoners are to be counted at their pre-incarceration address. And in order to do so, the census had to come up with an optional data product. That's what we're calling it. So this kind of came out of, there was a, I guess they were doing like, they were asking people to fill out forms online about what they think, how the prisoners should be counted. And so they got this information from citizenry, and they decided that they needed to come up with this optional data product to be able to support those laws. So basically what that says is, if the states want to count incarcerated individuals at their pre-incarceration address, the state needs to provide that information to the Census Bureau. So the Census Bureau, for their purposes, they're counting incarcerated individuals where they are incarcerated. They're going to follow the usual where I lay my head at night rule. But they will allow states to move prisoners back to their pre-incarceration address through this optional data product. So what FDPA has been doing, and I'm aware of at least back to March, we have been having conversations with Governor Wolf's administration regarding this product, and basically saying, you need to get the infrastructure in place. You need to be able to get the addresses for these incarcerated individuals such that we can have that information, we can give it to the Census Bureau, and then they can give whatever they need to give us back so that we can do this right, and we can do it the right way and do right by our communities. So we've had some success in that. Governor Wolf, and this is kind of the wording that we were given, was Governor Wolf is committed to having the Department of Corrections ensure that individuals who are incarcerated have their addresses more accurately recorded and available for use for the 2021 redistricting. So what I read into that is, just because they're going to make sure that we have it doesn't mean it will necessarily be used. So Fair Districts is very much an advocate for change without litigation. However, the idea is there's this existing law in place. If you don't do this and you don't follow the law, litigation will ensue. So at this point, more work is needed to pressure to use that redistricting, or to use the information for redistricting in the future. So hopefully, this is kind of needed in combination. I believe it's needed in combination with our Independent Citizens Commission, so that our Independent Citizens Commission, who we expect will be fair and transparent, will use this data and do it the right way and do what they're supposed to do and count individuals at their pre-incarceration addresses.
Without any change to existing law?
Without any change to existing law, yes, because existing law says they have to register at their home address. So if you have to register there, that's where you should vote. That's who your elected official should be. Now, there are some that say that maybe this law isn't concrete. It doesn't concretely say prisoners should be counted at their pre-incarceration address for redistricting purposes. So there is some legislative solutions out there. One's House Bill 940 that was introduced by Rep. McClinton, and it's co-sponsored by, I believe, maybe like 15 other representatives, and it specifically amends the PA election code. And just to be clear, the law that's in place is in the PA election code. It's underneath the voter registration clause. But this HB 940 will kind of make it concrete, cement, and clear that for the purposes of congressional, legislative, and municipal redistricting, incarcerated individuals should be counted at their pre-incarceration address. So FDPA action on that is we are going to be making a statement of formal support, and we will be reaching out to the legislators, the sponsoring legislators of that bill, to find how we can help promote the bill and support the bill. And if there's any other future legislation that comes up, we'll look into supporting those as well. So how are we going to kind of do that? So right now there is information on the Fair District's website about prison gerrymandering. I know at one point there was more information, and and it was thought that it was maybe a little too complex and wonky, and so some of that information was removed, but they're going to be looking to beef that up again and maybe put it out there in a more presentable and understandable and digestible format. And then the other thing is, we have a kind of a small prison gerrymandering task force at this point. It's been in place for a year. I've been on it. Bob from Delco has been on it. Justin's been on it. And we have a member, Alicia, who is not here today, who is also on that task force. And basically the idea with this task force, we are also interested in inviting other people to this task force. So if anyone is interested in this issue, why you're laughing, what did I miss? Yeah, if anybody is interested in engaging in this issue and being part of this task force, basically the idea with it would be to come up with ideas of how to take actions on this and how to engage interested communities, how to engage, like specifically in Philadelphia, how to engage our Black and brown communities on this issue, because this is something that very much affects them disproportionately, as you saw earlier.